Good morning, everybody. I'm Graham Rosenberg from HESCI, and I've been managing the Year 2 TEF. I have with me Philip Walker, who is our Deputy Head of Communications.
Good morning.
We're here this morning to help inform you about how the TEF outcomes are going to be communicated and the branding and logos and so on that you as institutions can be using. Now, we have circulated two documents that hopefully you will have had a chance to read. The first was the dissemination of outcomes document, which has various information about the timing and the content of what's going to be published. And then more recently, yesterday, we sent you a link to the logos and to a branding guide, which I hope you've had a chance to read. If not, you can see on your screen, there's an overview section at the bottom of your screen. The links to both of those documents are there, so hopefully you can get a chance to look as we go through. A few words about the format of this webinar before we continue. Please do ask questions as we go through. We actually don't have an awful lot to tell you that isn't in those documents. So really, this is a chance to ask us questions, and we'll try and answer them as best we can. Click on the Ask a Question button on your screen, and that's how you ask us a question. We see them as they come through. We'll take some of the questions as we go through the presentation, and then we will pause at the end of each of us has some slides. We'll pause at the end and take the questions up. If you can't see the slides, please refresh your browser. If you have any other technical difficulties, then please flag it by asking it as a question, and I have a couple of colleagues in the room who will try and deal with that. Okay, we're going to begin. I will start with a very brief overview of what TEF Year 2 is all about. And I know many of you will be very familiar with all of that, but there may be some of you, particularly on the marketing and communication side, that haven't been very involved with TEF. So it may be helpful just to do that first. Then I'll pass over to Philip, who's going to talk about the communications and branding side of it. Okay, if I go quiet, it's because there's a slight delay in progressing through the slides, and skip forward 2. I'll go back again. Okay, so I'm sure as you know, the Teaching Excellence Framework was introduced by the Department for Education. The key document is, you can see a picture of there, the specification for the Year 2 exercise. And it's been introduced with the aim of better informing students about where to study and raising esteem for teaching and recognizing and rewarding excellence in teaching. Now, it's important to remember that the TEF is about identifying excellence in teaching in addition to the quality assessment systems that we have across the UK, and it is voluntary. And you will see in the documents that we've circulated, when we explain the TEF to students and to the public, we try to make all of this as clear as we can. The assessment itself is broken down into 3 aspects of quality that have been looked at: the teaching quality, the learning environment, and student outcomes. Each of those 3 aspects has some criteria that sit beneath it, which I'll talk about shortly. And the assessment is based on a set of evidence against those criteria. The evidence comprises of metrics, 6 metrics, and a provider submission. The metrics are based on the National Student Survey. 3 of the metrics are taken from the NSF. As well as non-continuation rates, and 2 metrics relating to employment and highly skilled employment, which are taken from the Destination of Leaders of Higher Education survey. I'm not going to go into the detail of metrics now, but just to say that they are metrics which are benchmarked to take account of differences in student characteristics at each provider. The assessment was carried out by a panel supported by a group of assessors that involved academics and students and widening participation and employer representatives. And we have now completed the assessment process and, as you're well aware, preparing to disseminate the outcomes. A little bit more about the criteria, so we can just get a bit more understanding of what has been assessed. Under each of those three headings, you can see that there are some criteria. I'm not going to read through them. I'll just pause there for a moment. Okay. In terms of the process itself, the Year 2 TEF exercise started in October last year, when there was guidance published and metrics were released to institutions. Providers made their applications in January, late January this year. Then we had the panel and the assessors assessing those. We've got the outcomes and are preparing to announce them in mid-June. There will be an appeals process after the outcomes are published. The appeals will be on grounds of procedural irregularity, and if there are any changes as a result of appeals, they will be published at the end of that process. We will be releasing further details about the appeals process shortly. Now, after the application deadline, we published some information about how many providers are taking part, and you can see a summary here. I think if we add that up, 299 in total. And this includes, in the top table, the providers that have applied for a full assessment and will receive a rating of either bronze, silver or gold. And the 65 in the table at the bottom have opted in for a provisional award because they didn't, at this stage, have sufficient metrics to be assessed for a bronze, silver or gold rating, but will get this provisional award to indicate that they are taking part. So the outcomes for each provider taking part will be one of these awards, and these are the logos: gold, silver, bronze, for some reason in a slightly different order, and provisional. That's the main outcome from the TEF. Each of them will be valid for up to 3 years, depending on the availability of metrics. And the other outcome that will be published is a brief statement from the panel, a statement of findings that explains why that particular rating was awarded. Okay, I'm going to pause briefly to see if there are any questions on that quick overview of the TEF before I hand over to Philip.
There was a question about whether the slides on this webinar will be available for people who want to see it again or were not available today, and the answer is yes. We are recording the webinar, and we will circulate a link next week to TEF contacts and also the slides, so people can either look at the whole webinar or share the slides with internal colleagues who weren't able to attend the webinar today.
Okay, thanks. I'm now going to pass over to Philip.
Hi. So most of what I'm going to say is contained in the branding and information guidelines. There may well be issues that we haven't covered in the branding guidelines, so please feel free to ask questions. If they're highly technical questions for graphic designers, for example, our graphic design team here will be able to help either after this webinar or later. So there are 5 logos. The blue TEF logo is essentially the corporate logo, which you can use for generic material if you want. For example, if you have a section on your internal intranet where you're describing the TEF process. You could use the TEF blue generic logo there, but essentially we would expect you mostly to be using the logo that relates directly to the rating that you receive. And for each of the 5 logos, or each of the 4 logos, there are 2 versions. There's a version with just TEF Gold or TEF Bronze, etc. And there's a separate version with TEF and Teaching Excellence in full. And you can use either of those, whichever you choose, or depending on where it appears or what material it appears in. There are also a number of different versions. There are JPEGs, EPSs, GIFs. There are also reversed out versions for different use depending on, again, on how you're using it. And those are all available on the TEF logo website, which you will have received a link for. It's the same place where the branding guide lives. And they're in zipped files which you can download. If you have issues with firewalls, etc., that kind of thing, with virus protection, you probably need to speak to your IT teams to get advice. If you have any, as I said, if you have any technical queries, if your graphic designers want to contact us, we can advise. But there are also versions of the logo in the Welsh language as well. So lots of versions for you to use when the results have been published, but clearly not before. You cannot use the logos until the embargo is lifted, which is 0001 on Wednesday, the 14th of June. As well as the logos, there is also descriptions of each of the levels, gold, silver, bronze, and provisional. And we want you to use that text exactly as it appears. The only difference you can make is if you want to insert the name of your own institution, as shown in the second example. That's the only way you should use the text. There's also some generic text in the back of the branding guidelines, which describes the TEF process more generally, which you can use also if you want to. Okay, just to briefly talk about the timings. So on Monday, the 12th of June, each provider will receive its own rating and statement of findings under strict embargo. It'll be around 10 o'clock on Monday morning. The precise timing we were not exactly sure, but it'll be around 10 o'clock. And that will be sent to a number of contacts within the institution. And we've already sent you information about how to get your rating and who can access it. Somebody's asked a question about the wording. So the wording is in the branding guide. It's not in the logo itself. So if you open the branding guide, you'll find the wordings. So just going back to the timetable, on the Tuesday, you will have received your own rating and statement of findings on Monday. On the Tuesday, you will receive the ratings for all providers, again under a strict embargo. And then also on Tuesday morning, we'll be holding a press conference in London where we will invite all the specialist education press, the national education correspondents, and other interested parties. So they will have access to the ratings from the start of the press conference at 10 o'clock, and we expect that to finish by about 12 o'clock on the Tuesday. Then on the Wednesday, the embargo is lifted at 0001, and the results, all the information will be published on the HEFCE website, on the TEF pages of the HEFCE website, also on the Unistats website, but probably not at 0001, but probably later on the Wednesday, and also on the UCAS website. And the Unistats and UCAS will publish the awards only. So if people want to get the full information, they'll need to go to the HEFCE website. So what we'll be publishing on the HEFCE website will be the award for each institution, the validity of the award, how many years it's valid for, the statement of findings, the TEF metrics and contextual data and your own submissions. And there will be an open data set which anybody can look at and download and obviously do their own analysis. One thing we won't be doing is publishing any rankings. That's our normal position. But clearly, if journalists or anybody else wants to rank in a particular way, that's something that they will do. That's not a matter for us. And we do not comment on or support any particular ranking, and that's something that we would not do.
Yeah, I'll just chip in here because we've had a few questions about the statement of findings. So the statement of findings is specific to each provider. It is a brief summary from the panel about why they awarded that rating to the particular provider. It is quite brief. In addition to that, we've had a question, there is a generic description of what gold, silver or bronze is, and that's the example that we had on the screen earlier for gold. Those are in the branding guidelines. So there are these two things, the generic short description of what a rating is and then a specific statement for the institution.
Okay, so just want to make a few points about the embargo. Clearly, it's very important that everybody sticks to the embargo, which is 001 on Wednesday. You may not share the results internally or externally beyond the very, very small group, which has already been agreed. If you are contacted by a journalist, you clearly can comment on your own results, but not anybody else's, but only on the understanding that any comment you make is also under the strict embargo. We encourage you to issue your own press releases, do your own social media, but again, if you do issue a press release, make sure it's clearly embargoed and not widely circulated. So clearly you can send it to journalists, but we don't want your results to be out widely in case they're leaked. Somebody asked a question about the general overall statements about the TEF. And what we are hoping to do is to share our own generic press release with providers so that you can use the words in that as a framework to help draft your own press releases. We will clearly not be able to do that very far in advance, but what we aim to do is to provide you with some material which will help you to frame your own statements. I think there was a question about graphic design support. If you've got any queries about graphic design, if you email the customer services email that's on the final slide, if you've got any more generic inquiries, contact the TEF team, and both contact details are given there. And also on that slide, there's the link to the logo again. And can I just remind you that this webinar is being recorded, and we will share a link to the recording with you next week.
Okay, we've got quite a lot of questions coming in, so we're just going to take a minute to group them into related questions. We'll go quiet for a moment, and we'll be back in a minute. But keep asking questions if you have them. Okay, we're going to start going through the questions. I will first cover some of the more sort of policy-related ones, and then pass over to Philip, who will go through the branding-related ones. So there's a question about are FE providers included? The answer is yes. These are all providers of higher education, including HE institutions, FE colleges, and alternative providers. Okay. Let me just find the next question that is relevant to me. So there are a few more questions about statements of findings. Are the descriptions going to distinguish features or be similar? They will be quite short. So they will say, try to summarize succinctly how the combination of the metrics evidence and the provider submission led to the judgment. So they will say a bit about the key conclusion, initial conclusion based on metrics, and then some key features from the provider submission that affected the judgment. Okay, there are a couple of questions about the appeals process. Can't answer them now, but we will be circulating details about the appeals process in due course, with plenty of time before you receive the award to consider that. Okay. Then we've got some questions about franchising and validation relationships. This is fairly technical, but essentially the TEF is an assessment of the teaching that takes place at the college or the institution. So if there is franchise provision to an FE college, we are assessing all the provision at that college, including the franchise provision. Okay. Could we say a little more about the other published data additional to the TEF award? So we have on, best way to come at this, I think, on the student-facing websites, UCAS and Unistats, the key thing we'll be publishing there is the rating, the logo. And on Unistats, that will be shown on the provider information page, because this is a rating for the provider, not the course. So we don't on Unistats show it on the course pages. And it's really just the rating, but there will be a link through to the HEFCE website, and on the HEFCE TEF pages, we will publish the full details, which includes the rating, how many years it's valid for, the statement of findings, the metrics workbook, the contextual data, the submission from the provider, everything that was involved in the assessment process for that provider. Then we have the additional open data set, which puts all of the metrics and the outcomes into a single data set. If you're interested in details of that, we have provided a schema on the extranet, the TEF extranet, and we have asked heads of institution to nominate up to 3 people in your institution who've got access to the outcomes part of the TEF extranet. So these will be the people that can access the results on the 12th of June. You can also now go onto the extranet and you can see the schema for the open data. I think that's probably covered a few of the questions on that.
Shall we move on to?
Philip, do you want to take?
Yeah, I'll take it and I'll ask questions. Yeah. Okay, so we've had questions about social media. We will provide some Twitter postcards which will have the logo and a space which you can put your own messages into. There will also be a hashtag. We will circulate those via your TEF contacts and put them onto the logo file pages where the logo and the branding guides are. We've had a question about the press conference. Can institutions come to the press conference? Unfortunately, no. It would simply be impractical for anybody to come to the press conference. For institutions to come to the press conference, there simply won't be space. to do that. So the answer is no. We've had a question about who will our press release go to for you to use as a template. The answer is that, again, we're very clear. We want to avoid any possibility of leaking. So what we will do is we'll send it to the TEF, your TEF contact, and it will be the responsibility of the TEF contact to share that with the appropriate people within your institution. A question about the timing of the press conference. It will take place at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. It'll finish by about midday. We might do some interviews at the later part of that, but essentially around midday, from around midday, I would expect that journalists may start to contact institutions asking about their results. And I should specify again that you can only talk about your own results. I've got a question about, are you required to use the logo? What are our expectations about use of the logo? The answer is that is a matter for each individual provider to decide. There are no specific requirements. What we would hope that institutions who have taken part will use the logos, and clearly you can only use the logo for your own rating, but we're not making it mandatory to use the logo. Just having a look through other questions. There was a question about whether newspapers are going to use the TEF ratings for rankings. In terms of league tables, at least for this year, we don't expect any newspapers to use the TEF ratings for rankings. Partly because it's too late. A number of them have already been published. But also because the way they create their rankings, their league tables has already been decided. What they do on the day, on the Wednesday with the ratings, we don't know. But since there are around 300 providers, and the ratings are not particularly granular, doing an overall ranking would take a lot of space and may not be that useful or interesting. So I think we have to wait and see. But obviously, it's entirely up to each newspaper to decide or website to decide what we're going to do. Sorry, I'm going to hand over to Graham to answer a few more now.
Okay, can we just go to the top of the screen? So there's a question about if the award's valid for 3 years, can it change in the meantime? The short answer is yes. In order to maintain a TEF award, a provider needs to continue to meet the eligibility requirements and, crucially, to continue, if the provider in England, for example, to meet the APR requirements. So if a quality judgment changes, that could mean a TEF award being withdrawn. Okay. Is anyone aware of student-focused FAQs or general material about the TEF focused for students? Yes, if you have a look at the branding guidelines, look at the annex in that document, that includes a set of FAQs that we intend to publish on Unistats, and the aim is that it is addressing key questions that students might have about the TEF. Okay, will we make it clear that quality is high in the UK? Absolutely, yes. Again, if you look at the annex in the branding guidelines, it's the very first thing we say. And we try to be clear in all our communications that TEF is in addition to robust and rigorous quality assessment systems that apply across the UK.
There's a question about when you can issue your own press releases or statements about your own rating, whether you can do so from Wednesday the 14th of June. Yes, absolutely. From 001 on the 14th of June, you can put anything about the TEF in the public domain. Anything you issue before that needs to be under strict embargo and strictly limited to journalists who will understand the embargoes, but that should not be circulated more widely.
Okay, should I take one? It's a question about the arrangements for institutions in the transitional group regarding annual provider review. So these providers will have an APR status of pending. Now, for TEF purposes, if the provider is pending, yes, they are eligible for a TEF award, but maintaining that award is contingent on them passing through annual provider review with an eventual outcome of either meets expectations or meets with conditions.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions about the press conference. One was asking who will be on the panel. The main speaker will be Professor Chris Husbands, the chair of the TEF panel, who is Vice Chancellor of Sheffield Hallam University. He will be the primary speaker at the press conference. There was a question about quotes in the press release. We expect there will be a quote from Chris Husbands. There may be other quotes. We're still working on drafting the press release. There was a question about when you will get the template press release. We haven't quite decided that yet. It will be fairly shortly before the results go live, but we'll try and let you know that sometime next week. There are a lot of questions we haven't answered, so I suspect what we'll do is answer a few more, and then what we will try and do is see if there's any questions which have come up frequently, and provide some FAQs if we think those will be helpful.
Okay, I think we've had lots of very good questions from you, and I hope you found that helpful. If you do have further questions, there are contact details for the TEF team and for our comms team, so please do email them in. Just to remind you, we're aware that some people couldn't attend this webinar, so we will send the link to a recording to TEF contacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.